typically when an agent starts to get busy, what I find they try and leverage and grow a team around is, well, you know what? I need to focus on my clients. So I'm going to leverage the lead generation parts of this business. And that's the very last thing that you're supposed to leverage.
Yeah.
Okay. The lead generation aspect, that is the business we're in. I don't care what method you employ, but that is the business we're in. This is a sales business. It is service-based, but it is sales. You've got to convert. And so when an agent comes to me and they say, well, I'm going to grow a team and I'm going to hire an ISA to do my calls to my database, it's no, you're not. That's completely wrong.
Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. Well, folks, thanks for joining us on a special episode of Rethink Real Estate. We've got celebrity guest, I would say, David Morse. And I put David in as a celebrity in my own right because David's been somebody that we've had in front of the Harcourts network at our previous Harcourts Hype in Arizona. David, welcome to the podcast.
Ben, thank you so much. And to hear celebrity come out of your mouth, I mean, that's kind of cool. I'm flattered.
There we go. Well, so David, joining us from Arizona. Now, specifically where in Arizona are you based?
So my primary office is in Scottsdale, Arizona, on the north side of Scottsdale. We also have offices all the way from Sedona, Flagstaff area, clear down to Tucson and Sierra Verde. So my offices cover really the entire territory of Arizona.
Wonderful. And David, to give a bit more of an introduction to our guests that if they haven't heard you, they should have already. You have your own podcast called Real Talk, but then also just as a side hustle, you're the CEO for Keller Williams in Arizona. But when I say side hustle is that it's actually incredible to jump onto your social media platform that you've got. So Real Talk, check that out first of all, but on your social media, David D. Morse, I'll put the link in the bio for everybody to follow along, is that you are some type of messiah when it comes to your people in Keller Williams in Arizona, mate. Like some of the positivity, like I'm like, oh, come on, there's got to be some dirt here somewhere for me to rain on, but there was nothing.
I'm sure you can find some things. So we always post our wins, right? No, I am blessed to serve a diverse agent population, Ben, here in Arizona, who just, they're incredible, and I think we'll get into it. But when I look back over my career to this point, to think that I get to serve the number of agents and to just consult into their lives. I just wake up really feeling fortunate every day. And so, yeah, it's just really awesome.
It's interesting to find, somebody that hasn't lost faith in humanity with the volume of people that you deal with on a daily basis, because, it's funny though inspiring it can be in a leadership role that you have within the real estate community, it can be uninspiring as just as much because of the fact that giving the value that you give to the organization, giving the value you give to the community of real estate, and people not taking that with both hands and running with it, certainly has been something that I've had to work on over years, to understand that a much more smaller percentage of people will find value in what you do versus the vast masses that will take it and run. Have you found that as a challenge?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Ben. And I think as a young leader getting into this business, one of my coaches and a mentor of mine just told me very early on, 33% of people are going to love you, 33% of people are going to hate you, and 33% are going to be indifferent.
Yeah.
And it's not what you do with the people that hate you. It's what you do with the people that love you. That's really going to determine whether you move those 33% indifferent over to you. And so, yeah, I mean, if I spent time focusing my time and my energy and my attention on everyone who disagreed, or who, seemingly we had a falling out or disagreed with where we were taking the company, then, we wouldn't make any progress. And I think what I've learned is to try and stay humble, recognizing that there will be differences, but then being able to shake hands and just move on. be very stalwart and committed to the vision that we have for our company.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I think we both have probably seen the worst of humanity in sales, and yet. I still have faith that at the core, we all want to do good by people.
Yeah, definitely indeed. But before we dive into a little bit more of your backstory, maybe some numbers of your group so that it gives context. You mentioned you have offices all over Arizona, but the thing that's always been staggering to me is the vast number of agents that Keller Williams does hold. And I believe Arizona being one of the largest states for them across North America from agent population. But maybe some numbers of what your group does on an annual basis, how many agents that you deal with, so that people can understand the context of the information that you're giving them.
Yeah, sure thing. So we have three distinct brokerages in Arizona, three distinct franchises with Keller Williams. The Scottsdale Phoenix one, I get to serve 615 agents. We do roughly $1.5 billion in volume. Of those 615, just to give context, about 380 or so are actually producing agents versus licensed assistants or team members doing some other capacity work. We close over 2,000 units out of this brokerage. And then the other two offices do similar numbers as well. So when we total it all up, our group is responsible for about 1,300 agents across the state, doing about $4 billion in volume, and closing roughly 6,000 units.
Right.
So yeah, it's a sizable crew.
Yeah, definitely. It's always one of those things, and we'll dive into this a little bit later on. But Keller Williams attracting some of the larger teams within real estate in North America, and that structure itself has been something that you've spoken to the network or our network on previously, because you get some pretty good insight to some of those larger companies, or larger teams. But I guess from a company standpoint, with all of that collectively, where does that put you from an Arizona like market share perspective? Like, is that at number one market share, number two? Like, are there some bigger independents? Like, what sort of climate have you got there?
Yeah, so Scottsdale, if your listeners aren't familiar, Scottsdale is one of the biggest hubs for independent brokerages in the entire country. I mean, billions and billions of volumes are done by independents. And so Keller Williams has always been interesting from a market share perspective. Keller Williams, when you total up all the franchises, far outpaces all the other traditional franchise systems. And so from that perspective, we certainly can say we're number one in market share here. I try and be very, authentic in everything I do with numbers, right? And so when we're making reference that we are outpacing our competitors, I make sure that people understand that is every franchise within the Arizona system. So when you take just our numbers out of that,
Mm-hmm.
we certainly we rank towards the top, where we've been in Real Trends top 100 brokerages when you tally our three brokerages together.
Yeah, great. So either way is that I still think that Scottsdale has turned into one of those cornerstone marketplaces of North America. That certainly, it's sort of, it's had a great deal more attraction and runway than, say, the Austin marketplace. Austin sort of popped up out of nowhere pre-pandemic, and it was going strong with some of the tech people moving there, and then during pandemic has gone crazy and then has just completely dropped off. I think that and you may correct me if I'm wrong, Scottsdale's surprised me with the high frequency amount of consistency that has had over a longevity over a long time, with a lot of people that are moving from, or maybe even snowbirds that come from Canada or come from the colder states and sort of have a second home market, but then also the fundamental foundation of the full market itself in a normal market doesn't see as much seasonality. Is that a sort of a clear view, or?
Yeah, I think if you go to the reporting, outlets, Phoenix and Scottsdale never ranks number one or number two in terms of migration, right? You've got Florida, you've got Texas, you've got these other markets, but we're always ranking 5 to 7. or 4 to 6, somewhere in there. And so there's this consistent inflow of that second home market or people just migrating south. This happened way back in the last, recession, run up and recession. And we've seen it post pandemic as well, where the remote work started to really give us migration patterns from the, Silicon Valley, Pacific Northwest, all of California, and the Midwest has always been a consistent flow downward. You see a lot of financial industries where people licensed in the Midwest will get licensed here as well, because a large portion of their book of business is down here 6 months out of the year.
Yeah, probably about I'd say probably 9 or 10 agents within our Oregon network of about 150 agents that we operate with there. They've got their Arizona licenses. It's just a real appeal at the moment. But leading away from Arizona, how long have you been there, or how long have you been living in Arizona?
So since January of 2020,
okay.
I don't know why I moved here right before the pandemic, but that's just how it works.
Probably turned out to be a little bit better. Arizona was, whilst they were stringent like the rest of the country, they might have been a little looser with their policy around COVID versus Maine, where you came from.
Yeah. So I'm originally from Maine. That's where I got into the real estate business. Moved here after spending a couple years with Keller Williams Maine out there. So my entire real estate career has been with Keller Williams, and I've really fallen in love with this company. Prior to that, I was in the Midwest, between Wisconsin and Minnesota. I was in the insurance industry. Running a pretty successful insurance business for around 6 years before migrating back to Maine, where my wife and I are both from, getting into real estate. Keller Williams had the opportunity while there when I got there, we were about 300 agents. Within about 18 months, we had grown to roughly 600 agents, a little under that. And we became the third most profitable Keller Williams in the world.
Wow.
And we can get into that. Really, I think it's just a testament to the power of agents when they are moving together towards a common vision. You create a culture that everyone wants to be part of. And so, Ben, talk about I don't know if you've ever had the fortune, you probably have, of being in a market where you have so much market share that it just the market's just moving towards you. And that's what we were able to create in Maine. We were part of 1 out of every 2.23 transactions in the entire state.
Wow.
And so, and I know you guys have an office there now, and it's just neat to create that type of market share in capital among consumers. It was a lot of fun.
Would have been a great wave to ride. Certainly, there's no question to be part of that. It's funny, we've experienced that in a different way. Certainly in North America, there's been some in the expired market in Southern California to create market share for auction being a process. We have a lot of our Harcourts agents actually competing with each other on listings. But in Christchurch, New Zealand, where obviously New Zealand is the founding place that Harcourts comes from, there is 3 major franchises there with multiple different offices. If a seller goes to do get a listing presentation or an opinion and selling their home, there's typically about 4 to 5 agents to go in. 4 of those agents are Harcourts agents out of the 5. It's certainly something to experience. I've never sold real estate in New Zealand or anything along those lines, but I'm sure that you guys in Maine sounded like a dominant force.
It was a lot of fun, and what I still loved about it, and I think this is why I fell in love with the company, and why I just continue to really love doing business, with my company, is there was still the most abundance among our agents that I could have ever I could have ever wanted. Even though they were in that similar situation of competing against each other, I could get them around a table and they would throw their listing presentations on the table and say, this is what's working, this is what's not working. They never saw each other as competition, even though we were competitive. They saw the greater vision of what does it do when we take every listing in this entire state, what does that do for all of us? And I just think that's a really unique environment in any type of sales industry. And something that, to be honest, I don't know if I can ever duplicate that again. And yet it set a great precedent for what I always want to be chasing in all markets that I get to be part of and lead.
So, a couple of questions about that experience. First of all, I want to understand the transition from insurance to real estate and how that came to light and your thought process. And second question, which again maybe can be addressed in all in one, but it's funny how you look at the comparative to California agents versus the Oregon agents that we have. In California, the average production per agent for the industry as a whole, being real estate, is incredibly lower than what the Oregon business is. And, in Oregon, our average production per agent is $300,000 GCI per agent. Like, it's staggering in comparison to what it is in California, and the lack of deals that are done within California per agent, or the more part-time nature, and whether or not you saw a correlation between that in Maine versus Arizona in that transition as well. So maybe how you got into real estate first.
Sure. So I got into real estate. I'll keep this short. This could be an episode that you and I probably could pontificate on for a long time. Being in insurance, I started as a captive agent with an agency, and then I went into a corporate captive setting. And in that corporate captive setting, I was just getting exposed to blockchain technology. This was in about 2015. And as a young entrepreneurial spirit, as soon as I found that technology, I really dove into it and wanted to understand how it could potentially dislodge fiduciaries in insurance and in other industries. And I came to this realization that I honestly could not say, Ben, that I believed that I could retire out of the insurance industry before the technology displaced me. Now, that could have been just young nativity. I may now say like AI will only replace, or blockchain will only replace those who allow themselves to be replaced. But regardless, that's when I started looking up and saying, well, what other industries do I think within my lifetime, within my career, it will potentially not dislodge that fiduciary? Does that make sense?
That does make 100%.
And so when I looked up, one of the things I was involved in at that point was actually I was doing a little bit of private lending in the real estate space, lending money out on flips and things of that nature. I had done a little investing in notes. And so I started thinking to myself, real estate is very interesting. I never thought this would be a profession of mine, but this could be something where I don't see the agent being dislodged over the next 30, 40 years. So that was really the seed that germinated from there. And then I needed a little bit of a nudge because I was comfortable in insurance, but I was fortunate to meet some very special people in that investor group there who said, you know what, you're doing a lot of sales, consulting, leadership in this space. I want to give you a book. And they gave me a book that's become a Bible in real estate, The Millionaire Real Estate Agent. And they said, just look at some of these models. And what I found in looking at those models was a lot of the structure was very similar to what I was teaching in the insurance space, building teams, managing budgets, economic models, all these things. The numbers had a couple different zeros behind them. And yet I said, you know what? I can learn this. I understand this. This makes sense to me. And that's what gave me the confidence to take the jump out of insurance and into the real estate business.
So just the question out of that is that you could see the foresight to being able to see yourself being replaced before you could be retired in the insurance industry is probably a foresight that most people would bury their head in the sand about, because, you look at the blockchain technology for insurance, but then also the title process, all of that could certainly work with itself incredibly well. I think that the acceptance of it is a long way off. I think FTX has sort of put us back a little bit. But what was the thing that gave you the confidence in real estate where you didn't see the agent being replaced? Was it the emotional element of it? Was there a particular reason that you couldn't see the agent being replaced?
Yeah, I think originally it was actually the value of the transaction, on average being so different than the insurance or even the title piece. The overall value, right? We see real estate as this is probably the most significant asset in a person's portfolio. And also the amount of time between the typical transaction as well, I saw there needing to be much more relational capital that was being nurtured and kept between the transactions that I don't think technology was prepared to fill that gap. And so those were originally the two things. And again, I've always been a like, I'm going to retire by 35. I have this plan. So I wasn't even looking at a long runway. I think eventually maybe we do get to that place. And yet I was basically asking myself the question, can I retire in 15 years from this business? And when I looked up, I was like, there's no way the real estate agent's getting replaced in 15 years. We're way too far off from adoption for that. And so that's what gave me that confidence that said, hey, even if I'm wrong on 25, 30 years, I can still execute on my plan and vision for my life in enough time.
Yeah, great. Okay. So then I guess that noticing the vast differences and that Keller Williams business in Maine being the third most profitable, I believe you said, in the world, versus the type of agent within Maine and what they're doing from a transactional perspective versus the Arizona agent and the difference in those two marketplaces. Did you see a vast difference?
Yeah, I did. That's a great question, and I'm probably going to get myself in trouble here with my Arizona agents. And yeah, here's what I've noticed. Real estate can definitely be a secondary source of income, and it is a secondary source of income for a lot of people out here. And so one of the things that we run up against is the commitment level of an agent to grow a full-time business here in Arizona. And it's not to fault them. It's just the reality of the environment. And here's what why I think that is. In Maine, to give you an idea, we were closing roughly $1.5 billion of volume annually with a similar agent count, but at $227,000 average sale price.
Amazing.
Versus here, where our office average is over 600,000.
Yeah, amazing.
Right. And so what I found was there was a unit-based business planning that occurred in Maine. No one based their goals off from a volume standpoint or even a GCI standpoint. It was all unit driven. And so we were very calculated on, we're going to grow business plans around unit count because that's all you can control in your business, right? And I think that just created a different mindset in and of itself. The other thing is, in Maine, you're dealing with an average household income in the high 30s or low $40,000 range. And so when you get someone who's out working a very hard, logging is one of the biggest industries. My in-laws own a logging company. That is backbreaking work. And sometimes not for great income. If you're an employee, you take someone out of that context and you put them in front of a phone. They're not, in an air-conditioned office. They're not concerned about the rejection. They're like, wow, I get to take home a $8,000 paycheck by getting rejected on the phone 10 to 15 times a day. Sign me up. And so you're really making generational wealth changes in an agent's life rather quickly. We could do that within, the number of agents, rookie agents that I could point to that we turned into six-figure earners is just staggering.
Yeah.
And so then that's where that attractional pull versus here in Arizona. And again, it's not fault. It's just the economic landscape is different. The household income landscape is different. The motivation looks different. And so it becomes just a little bit more of a chore on our part as a brokerage to identify that motivation for our agents and to say, what is the business plan that's going to get you there? And then for us to accept that and also set standards and expectations around the type of agent that we want to attract.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing that you've drawn that correlation because I've had limited exposure to Maine with our business there. It's only been operational for just a little over 12 months. And there's certainly some things that I've unbelievably respect about people in Maine doing real estate, considering the fact that for at least 4 months of the year, you are pretty much snowed into your home if it's a bad season. So there's that attribute. And then I look at the correlation between Oregon and California because our business is predominantly West Coast. We have a great presence. We've got some of the top 5 businesses in Oregon versus the Californian agent perspective of not only that transaction value and GCI and volume of real estate sold being a talking point that I'd never even considered until you'd mentioned it then, versus you're right, all of our business planning is based around unit volume in Oregon. Now, that said, it's interesting to see over the last 2 to 3 years, where one of our best businesses in our network is in Bend, Oregon, that transition of that marketplace going from an average sale price of $450,000, $500,000 for the office, now going almost over a million, about $800,000, $900,000. It's funny how the agents, they're not getting a sense of self-entitlement. They're just continuing to move through. They're being very conscious of their net growth, making sure that they're not just riding the wave of the value of property and actually doing more. But it's funny how they seem to be bringing up GCI a little more than what they typically used to. It's not as much about the volume of units sold. It's now a little bit more about the GCI, because that number or that volume is much more attractive now in comparison to the California agent or the Seattle agent being Washington or the Hawaii agent that they compare themselves to.
Yeah, I'm glad that I'm not the only one that sees that, because again, this is just it's a hypothesis as to why it is, but I do think there is a gravitational pull that occurs for an agent when you start growing bigger checks, and those individual checks. I just had an agent quite successful for his first year in the business, and if you look at the trajectory of his business, he was steadily closing one or two deals, okay, every month, okay, respectable for just getting in. And then all of a sudden, he gets a $75,000 commission on his biggest sale. And what happens? The activity level drops down through the basement. And while you'd think it would create this, oh, that felt good, I want that more. And it does that for some agents. I find that the majority of agents, it creates a, oh, I'm set for a few months.
Yeah.
And he came back into my office and he said, this is what it did to me. I don't want to do that again. And I said, this is the solution. Units, 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 units. Stop focusing on the volume. Stop focusing on the size of the check. Units. Move the units. And what that's going to do, and we get into this when we teach our expansion model, right, of opening up real estate teams and businesses in other locations. When you're unit based, you can create predictability in your systems and processes so that you can go open in any other market.
And that segues us perfectly into a topic that I do want to cover today, which is building a team. I think that you're somebody that is not only knowledgeable from being in the Keller Williams model for as long as what you have, knowing it your entire real estate career so far, but also getting to see it from a vast level of people building around you. I think one of the things that we enjoyed when you did your session to the network was how comprehensive you put it together, the structure of doing so. There's a part of this, though, that I'm still skeptical about, and I think that this is an internal belief, David, is that in Australia, where I've grown up doing real estate and in New Zealand or anything along those lines, there's not very big teams that are built, because usually if somebody's in your team, they will typically be good enough to then move on and do their own thing, and they'll do that relatively quickly. And you can't hold enough of a value proposition for anybody good to stick with you for long. So I'm still skeptical around the team element. I just wanted to get your perspective of how you see it work best in a model and in a marketplace that is so ripe for it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's okay to feel that and have those beliefs, because the predominance is that teams can't retain talent. Okay, and I think if I were to pinpoint why that is and how to guard against it, it's not allowing agents to build teams too quickly. Okay. An agent tastes success and they immediately think, well, now I need to become, this team over here, this team over here. I need to expand. And what they do is they start expanding in the wrong ways. They start bringing on the wrong talent. And so, and you experience this too, because I'm sure you have systems and models that you teach, Ben. But agents will taste a little bit of success in our world, and they'll immediately think, I have a creative, new, better way to do this. And so what I see is them starting to leverage off the wrong things first. Okay. I could go a couple different directions, but I want to stick first with leveraging the right thing first. Um, Typically, when an agent starts to get busy, what I find they try and leverage and grow a team around is, well, you know what? I need to focus on my clients, so I'm going to leverage the lead generation parts of this business, and that's the very last thing that you're supposed to leverage.
Yeah.
Okay, the lead generation aspect, that is the business we're in. I don't care what method you employ, but that is the business we're in. This is a sales business. It is service based, but it is sales. You've got to convert. And so when an agent comes to me and they say, well, I'm going to grow a team and I'm going to hire an ISA to do my calls to my database, it's no, 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 you're not. That's completely wrong. And so it's teaching agents what to hire for first, and also teaching them the capacities that every hire ought to create within your life. Like when you hire an assistant, how many more transactions should you be able to add as a result of that hire? Okay. And agents just, it's again, it's not bad. We have a lot of agents that come from this, from being servers, bartenders, hospitality, all of these different businesses where they don't necessarily have business training.
Mm.
So they have to be taught these things. When it comes to long-term retention, I think there's a growing majority of agents that we could say are quality salespeople, great at service, and could do the things that a team provides, but they just don't want to.
Understood.
And so I think where the team concept really does have validity and where we're seeing long-term retention, it's within those teams that have figured out, how do I provide the things that my agents just don't want to do? I mean, I don't know if this is true in your network, Ben, but in my network, agents, they hate marketing themselves. Like they're not good at it, and they just say, hey, I'll pay for it. They're not good at the operations and administration part of the business, right? They want to pay for that. Okay. And they should. That should be the first thing that they leverage. The coaching and training. All my agents pay for coaching and training. They want it. They crave it. They know they need to be learning based in order to grow. Okay. Leads, right? Relo leads right now. I mean, you're paying a 40% referral fee
Yeah, huge.
on relo leads, all these different things, and ultimately appointments, right? And what we're finding is that there are very, very talented agents out there who, if you can hand them 150 listing appointments a year, they'll take a 10% commission split. And that allows you as the team owner to fortify the back end and provide a value proposition that you can fund on that other 90%. Now, most teams don't get there. And yet that's where we're seeing the longest term retention among our teams, where we're seeing a hamster wheel,
Yep.
so to speak, is those people who try to grow way too fast. They don't know what their value proposition is, period. And they try and build it on leads, which they never actually had in the first place.
Yes.
It was just a condition of the market.
Yeah.
So they thought they had leads for a very short period of time. And that's where I see growth and failure back and forth.
I think that that's just eloquently put in a way that is very easy for somebody to understand, but also the real point that sort of there is a parallel drawn from an opinion perspective is that people trying to do it too soon and for the wrong reasons in the perspective of getting rid of the parts of the business that they may not like. Well, now, if you don't like administration, that's fine. You can remove that. But if you don't like talking to the people that actually are your business, then that's a bigger, deeper issue that building a team isn't going to solve. So the thing that I've seen, David, and it's kind of along the lines that what you've said, but I'd love your validation or your thoughts on this, is that I find that when an agent's ready to grow and they're ready to bring somebody into their team, typically they'll make a decision around somebody administrationally that to help them with the paperwork or the operational portion of their business. But what they don't have before putting that person on is their own internal structure. So they haven't spent a time to actually identify and go through and plan their structure to a T of, hey, I've got a listing appointment. This is the things that I need. Then after the listing appointment, this is the follow-up. Like very detail-orientated stuff that most people and agents do not like to dive deeply into. And they believe that employing a person to come up with that, the easiest way to do that is to employ a person to come up with that versus have somebody, they plug them into a process that is already designed based on their success, and then What I typically see is once they put somebody on, if they haven't done that, then that person then leaves or whatever it may be, and then they lose complete momentum and they don't want to go through this hassle of having to train somebody again, all because they didn't start with the one thing that they needed before making the hire was a set structure that that person was to follow, so that if that person does move on, then they've got a job description and a role. It's not about things changing from a structural perspective of their business. It's just a personnel change. Do you see that in the foundations of the teams that you have in play in your operation?
All the time. All the time. And, I think it is, and this is, I'm really big on, if anyone's thinking about going into team building, the second you go from an individual agent running your own business to creating a team, whether that's just one administrator, transaction coordinator, or, several, you've made a shift from salesmanship to leadership. And there's a famine of leadership, right? And I'm convinced if you can master leadership, then you can master a lot of these things, and it's going to get you much further, much faster. And I bring it to leadership because what you just referenced there, Ben, in my opinion, is that's self-leadership. Have you even led yourself to the point where you can identify, if you have some white space on your calendar, you can sit down and you can get in a meditative state where you say, what do I do? What is the journey that I am bringing clients through? What am I doing in my day-to-day such that I can hand that over to someone that they can then run as a process? To think that someone's going to come into your world and be able just to pull it out of you, that's just ludicrous.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. You need to be able to articulate, which then also just comes back to your value prop, right? You need to be able to articulate what are the valuable things that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis that's leading to the result that we want.
Yeah, indeed.
When you can provide that to someone, then you have something to hold them accountable to.
Absolutely. As we're a little bit over the average length of an episode, but it's so valuable stuff that you're going through. I've got one more question for you, and again, it might be a little taboo, but at the same time, is that I'm interested in your opinion at the moment of the transition. Keller Williams is a model that certainly for a long, long, long time has held the market share of North American real estate. The Remaxes of the world had that for a period of time. Keller Williams, I believe, is the modern day of that. Then you've got now these models like a cloud-based model of EXP and Real that have come to the equation of the real estate space. Now, do I believe, Real, the new business Real that Sharan Shivatz is heading up, that is, a business that really is primarily recruiting EXP agents because somebody interested in a cloud-based business is probably already there. Have you got an opinion on all of these different models and spaces? Like, I have a very firm opinion on Compass and the reality of that if you gave me $1 billion that they had, that I could have bought market share as well, just to figure out that a traditional brokerage makes more money, like no problem at all. There's a great deal of difference in all of these models that are out there, and there is a great deal of money being thrown into the sector. Thoughts around where real estate's going, where the model's going, Keller Williams' influence on that, all of those things.
I appreciate that question, and I love talking about these things. I'm also very careful to always look and say, okay, what is the best thing that's happening over here, and how can we pick up from that? I think every brokerage is going to serve a specific niche of clientele, and I think when it comes to Real, it is the newest iteration of an EXP, and it's going to be attractive to that person who wants to dive into that recruiting sector, and I have no problem with that. And I'll say very frankly, in the last 90 days, I've lost some very, very quality agents that want to go into that model. And that's totally fine. And what I say to them is, if recruiting is your primary game, then fantastic. This is a model built for recruiting. If real estate business and growing your real estate business is the game, I think that traditional brokerage can still serve you at just as high or higher of a level. Because here's what I found during COVID. During COVID, when we all went off into our own separate areas, this was just humanity in general. It wasn't just real estate. What was the biggest craving, right? It was for community. It was for people. It was for face-to-face, belly-to-belly action, right? And so what I think might be missing in that model is while you can do this over screen, and that serves a specific purpose, you don't get the interaction in person that I think all business people need. And so what you're seeing even in those models, at least what I am, because I have friends that are, top recruiters in those models, top performers. What you're seeing though is them even having to spend dollar to bring that in-person community into existence. And so while at the surface level, you may say, well, in this cloud-based model, I can run a margin that's, 20% higher than over here. In reality, you really can't, because you're having to foot bills for a lot of things that a traditional brokerage may provide for you. So that's just one aspect. We could go in a lot of different ways.
Of course.
And yet, I think at the end of the day, every brokerage is going to serve a specific agent. And how I want to approach it as a leader is I'm responsible for how I catch people in my web, how I serve them to a level that they want to stay. And this goes back to growing a team, growing a brokerage, whatever. I call it the 3 R's of leadership. It's reach the person that you're after, ready them for the role that they're taking on, and then retain or release them for what their next endeavor is. And oftentimes that is release. And I'll tell you right now, how you get out of business with people is one of the biggest indicators for how you're going to do in future business, in my opinion. And so if I can release people to do whatever's next for them, I have a far greater opportunity to bring them back into my world when the timing's right.
I think that's beautiful, well put, because I've always said from that perspective is that you can ask somebody to have loyalty to a company and loyalty to a brand, but don't ever ask them to choose that level of loyalty over loyalty to themselves. They have to be loyal to themselves, and they have to obviously feel comfortable in the position that they're in. And if they don't feel like they're in a position to grow, and you've got to convince them of that, they're always going to question it in a different way, and that's going to be more distracting to where they need to put their attention, which is growing themselves and moving forward. And if you can do that in a amicable manner, it all rounds out. But David, thank you so much for your time on the podcast today. I think that there's been some incredible insights, and certainly looking forward to continuing our relationship as I get to know you more and I get to hear more of your insights.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.